So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. We are listed, the panelists are listed on mondaylive.org in case you are wondering who we are. And just to point out that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's make the conversation interactive by posting your questions and comments on the Zoom chat as we get going here. And also this slide deck is available on mondaylive.org in case you need any of the links or information that we're providing on it. So this is the last show of September when we are talking about the changing landscape, the big changing landscape. So we're going to start to wrap up that conversation. That should be interesting. And so the agenda, our normal chit chat, and then we'll talk about the changing landscape and really the fact that there's a lot of changing technology. There's the changing technology landscape is really the sort of the core of what we want to talk about today, but not necessarily about the technology itself, but about how we as an industry need to react or need to evolve with the changing technology. So that's kind of the way we want to have this conversation today, and hopefully a lot of discussion. But before that, handing it over to Ken for an update on this side.
Thanks, Anto. We're hard at getting ready for AHR Chicago. We're going to celebrate our 25th anniversary there and announce how we're going to move through the next 25 years. So that should be interesting. As we mentioned earlier, before we came online, Mark P. Talk is everywhere. And it's good to see not only automated buildings reinventing itself, but CABA reinventing itself as Ashby. And they're doing some interesting podcasts. And part of that interesting podcast is Mark and Brian Turner talking about the future. And they even started chitter-chatting about decarbonization, which is an interesting topic for both of them. And I thought it was a really good session. I listened to it, and I'd recommend that you do as well. The link is there on our slide. Another thing that I'm quite proud of is I just found out about this North America's first zero carbon office tower is in Vancouver. It's actually quite an attractive building. So it shows you that zero carbon doesn't need to be ugly and clunky. It can be quite trendy. And Vancouver has, of course, supported heavily they do not allow any new buildings to be built with carbon coming into them. There's no gas lines allowed. So that's an interesting read as well. We have an article that came on our site. Decarbonization requires a faster pace of retrofit. Lots of messages there. This whole decarbonization thing is taking on a big position in our industry. I know Brad that works for SES, they had to rebrand. They were trying to get engineers and couldn't get engineers. And when they basically advertised for decarbonization engineers, all of a sudden, then they started, the floodgates opened, and they had lots of people who wanted to be in that industry, but they didn't want to be just engineers. So anyway, interesting times. The other message there is retrofits. The amount of new construction, especially for the next little while, is definitely going to be, I think, slowed down a lot, and we're going to see transitions in the industry where folks are going to have to move from new construction to retrofits. The good news is everything needs to be retrofitted. So the retrofit market, I think, is about ready to boom. This particular article is interesting too, because it comes from the lighting industry. Basically, our contributing editor, Craig, who has basically always been talking to us about lighting, they actually brought this forward. So the decarbonization, we kind of see it as our industry driving it. But if you can see by the picture there, there's a lot of industries that are driving the decarbonization pitch, I guess. And it links to retrofitting buildings to be future fit, which is an interesting word. I hadn't heard that. So we're all well on our way to the journey to decarbonization, as well as all of the other things we're talking about. Back to you, Anto.
Thanks, Ken.
Hey, can I ask Ken a question there? It seems like a basic question. It's something that I've noticed over the past few years. Why is it, Ken, that Canada is so far ahead of the US in its regulatory stance on decarbonization?
Simple question. All this global warming is melting the polar caps. It's running over Canada. We put in generators and sell you green electricity. Sorry, that's a bit of a glib remark, but it is true that we do have a tremendous amount of hydro available to us, so we can actually be carbon free. It's much easier. About, I don't know what the number is, it's close to 80-90% of all power generated in BC comes from hydro. So basically for us to make, for Vancouver to do that, it is actually possible. I'm kind of guessing on the East Coast, it's a much more difficult problem to completely become carbon free. But I think the message is there that it can be done, and I think everyone is seeing the move to electrification, and then that's getting amplified with electric cars. And actually, I was pleased to see both Mark and Brian talking about that in their podcast. So definitely give that a listen.
Yeah. Does Canada have any nuclear?
You can, instead of retrofit, how about or actually 2 words, adaptive reuse of buildings? That's what I'm starting to hear more and more of. Again, it's, taking older buildings and adapting them to the reuse of today, and to taking existing buildings and turning them into data centers, as an example, so forth and so on. So adaptive reuse.
Actually, that's interesting. In our programs for Chicago, that is that the focus of a lot of the master systems integrators are moving from office buildings to data centers, and it makes sense. We're kind of following this whole data movement, and it takes a lot of energy to move all this data around about, and it needs to be done efficiently. It needs to be done without interruption, and if it can be done with green power, that's a big bonus. So yes, it's a very big trend. I think the retrofit does fit the term, that we will be taking these existing buildings and retrofitting them. Yeah, there's a whole movement in Canada here for decarbonization. A lot of organizations and stuff that are starting to head in that direction.
Somewhat surprising, though, I guess, that buildings can be used for data centers. I mean, they need so much cooling, and they just need, rack space and stuff. You'd have thought an office wasn't an ideal kind of building to actually put a data center in, but they don't want glass, they don't want anything else, they just want cooling.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that some of them are even underwater. Some of them,
People build them up in Norway where you get a lot cooler air.
Yeah. So, but by the same token, we have a lot of waterfront buildings and stuff too, where there is cooling available.
Right, let's move on, shall we?
Yeah, I think that could be another topic.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Rick.
Yeah, we just put a post up about to be able to catch up with what Coalition for Smarter Buildings has been up to, and I kind of use it as an opportunity to put a few suggested reading, so background relative to some of the technology and some of the framework and or foundation that is the basis for what we're doing with our work in the coalition, and talk about cloud native, of course, GEBS 2525 and how that works with the master format, and then the work by Harbor Research. So as we go towards what we're going to have next month or a couple weeks from now with another office hours. Just thought it would be good to kind of remind people of some of the work that's behind our work behind the work. So that's sort of the update from the coalition, but I wanted to throw in something about the Canadians. Now I understand why DAM and Canadians are always associated. That's a reference to hydro, guys. Come on, laugh.
Yeah, I saw what you did there. It didn't really work, Ricky.
I wrote it all down and everything, and it just didn't work. Sorry.
And you have another slide, Drake.
Okay, so this is the official invitation to the office hours, which is coming up on October 5th. So click on the link and get yourself registered.
Which is Thursday week, right? Or a week after that? I think it's Thursday week. Okay, good stuff. And the community link board, it's there. Nothing has changed on that front. Any other news or thoughts anybody want to bring in before we get back to our topic?
I heard something on The Economist. You guys could tell me whether it's BS or not. People buying buildings now only want to buy buildings that are smart.
Makes sense. Don't know whether it's true.
I don't know whether it's true.
What's the data?
I did notice something. We were doing comparative analysis of our building against others and what the possible market price might be. And this is very off the cuff kind of a study, but we noticed that in the Phoenix area, buildings that seem to have or include or mention that they were smart or integrated or any reference to that had an average price per square foot slightly higher than others.
Cool.
Was the Economist stating that is the case, or were
they were stating that was the case? I don't have the data behind me. I apologize for that. It was just interesting, and
okay.
Yeah.
I'll bring the receipts next time, Anto.
So on to one of the standards that I came a little bit familiar with this summer regarding energy, and this may play into our broader topic here this afternoon, is the passive house standard for energy efficiency, and it's clearly less about controls than it is about sealing up the building. But the dramatic effect it can have on reducing overall energy consumption in a building is impressive when you can do it. And I think it's worth some attention as we go forward to better understand it. I know someone who's a consultant in this area and helps building owners design in both existing and new properties to meet the passive house standard. But are you guys familiar at all with passive house and how that works? Because a lot of we're all familiar with LEED to a certain degree, but the Passive House Institute and the standards that they set blow LEEDs away big time in terms of what they're able to do to reduce energy consumption.
Yeah, I live in a house like that. 33 years ago, we built a passive home, triple glazing, high mast, inside, completely computerized, and yep, it works.
Yeah, it started out on like you said, Ken, in the residential market, but it's now it's finding its way into commercial as well, for sure. And I think it's anyway, from a trend standpoint, I think it's worthy of discussion and potentially pulling into some of our future conversations.
Okay, keep that in mind.
Yep.
Roger, I feel that you're eager to jump in on something since you've been
No,
no, good.
No, I was just thinking about older houses and stuff that can't actually be done, or older buildings, because the problem is we've got so much old building stock, and going back to the retrofit and refurb, it's you wonder whether it's worth refurbishing or retrofitting some of these buildings if they're so inefficient anyway.
All right, let's move on then, since there's nothing else. So we are talking about the changing landscape, and as I mentioned, really want to talk about the changing technology landscape, but not so much about the technology per se, but the impact of it. So the last week we were talking significantly about, or the last couple of weeks, about cloud native, and also last week very specifically about the experience side of things. We spent quite a bit of time saying, basically, what if the experience of engineering the sort of technologies that we talk about all the time is more like the consumer experience, more like the plug and play experience that we have with our phones, right? And we actually went through a sort of a scenario of that with a fictitious guy by the name of Jake. You know, what if cloud native and those kinds of technologies that we're working on putting into the IBB can potentially change significantly the way the industry works, right? So that's kind of the technology change that we're referring to. So if we look at the typical channel, and this is not, this table is not scientific, it's not totally accurate, but it's just a sort of give you a sort of a view of an overview of the channel and all the different types of channel here that we've actually put. We've put everything from control contractors all the way up to consulting engineering firms, A&E firms. And we also added a column specifically on what we call adventurous owners. In other words, owners that can't wait and just want to do stuff themselves, a DIY kind of owner. We're starting to see a lot of that kind of behavior in the market, and how they compare with respect to a number of different attributes. So, for example, on something like IT skills, clearly the control contractors don't really excel in those areas. Even system integrators, that's not really their business. MSIs know quite a bit more. FMs know. Managed service providers have pretty extensive IT skills. That's kind of the assumption here, and not so much on the engineers, and the owners do as well. So this is kind of how we the owners do as well on an applied basis. So on the HVAC skills, obviously the players on the left are pretty good, but then we start to suffer on the right-hand side. This is kind of the motivation, just thinking about, you know, since change is about people changing what they do, you know, what is the motivation for these kinds of companies? And obviously control contractors, they have to install stuff in accordance typically of specification. System integrators need to make everything to work with each other. MSI, we kind of put complexity there because that seems to be what attracts MSIs, when there's a lot of systems that need to be engineered to work with each other. Facility managers, obviously day-to-day operation, and managed service providers it's really about the infrastructure of a building in operation, and owners about being an early adopter. The business models are all different here, but the projects tend to be the ones on the left, and as we move over to the right, they tend to be sort of more like services. Right, so this is kind of the starting point. And then the next thing that we did was to actually sort of ask, what are the current challenges that's facing these companies typically? And again, this is not scientifically accurate. It's just kind of an impression of the market. Control contractors are concerned about increasing IT complexity, and so does the system integration people, MSIs. We put here sort of a questionable or weak value proposition. Interesting to see them going into data centers that may well support this argument. Facility management, we think from a cloud, from an information perspective, don't see common systems. Managed service providers are clearly looking for opportunities. A&E firms don't want to be left out in this sort of move towards digitization. while the owners are just wanting to find solutions that actually does something. The next row, I'm not going to go point by point, is kind of the result of if they were to do nothing, right? In other words, if these players were to not to change their way of business or the way of doing things, this is kind of some of the potential sort of scenarios. And this is kind of the bottom line, is that we think that for a lot of these players, there is some really tangible benefits of actually thinking about cloud native and IBB. And these are sort of snippets of thoughts about this. So this is kind of what I'd like to talk around for the rest of the hour, and we can keep this up or we can take this down if we want to go a different direction. But I'd love to get you guys to comment on this way of looking at things, and how cloud native and something like the IBB can potentially change the different players of the industry. Open it up. I know this slide is there's a lot in it, and you kind of are drawn into some of the words, so I advise we don't do that. Don't get too geeky into it, and just think about the sort of just the big picture stuff.
Well, let me just start, maybe others can chime in. You know, one of the things I've been saying all along through this process, when you look through sort of these different kinds of businesses, almost, if you look at the list down the left-hand side, I think the most important thing that is going to foster change in the direction we're talking about is once individuals and companies understand how their business model is going to change with all of this, right? Some, it won't be much change at all. You can see some of that in here. Others, it could be a significant change. Some, they will see it as opportunity for growth. Others will see it very much as a threat to their, sometimes their very existence on this whole thing. So I don't know how that overlays maybe on some of this, but I'm just throwing that out there. It's interesting to look at this in this kind of detail, but ultimately I think that is where all of this is headed, right? This is kind of the first stepping stone towards that.
I'm also wondering, I mean, the industry's traditionally been very lethargic in picking up things and apathetic, but clearly things are changing now. But is this still more of a push than a pull? I mean, it's going to need both for this to happen. Is it the people who have come to the market with applications as well as new solutions pushing this, as opposed to the demand from the customers who clearly after COVID and things like that have got some ideas? But I just wonder how much those occupants, whether they be owners or just occupants, are actually driving some of the needs now, as opposed to it just being pushed on them by the suppliers.
That's why we put the column on the right, obviously, to surface that. But that doesn't answer your question. Maybe Rick can chime in on that, because that's been his perspective. You're muted. He's probably on the phone. All right.
Sorry, I'm multitasking. Repeat the question.
Roger was saying this is all great, but is it just push from the supply side rather than evidence of any pull?
Oh, there's actually a lot of pull from and that's kind of why Otto talked about the DIY owners as a key example of very specific large enterprises that are asking very specific questions about how do we get a more open platform, not be locked into the vendor choices that we've had in the past. Those RFPs, have been coming more and more frequently and more clear about the specific desire that the owner is able to articulate, either directly or with the help of some of the more innovative engineering firms that are helping write some of these RFPs that are looking for this more interoperability and IT centric solutions. But it's like a chicken and no eggs, or no eggs and a chicken. I don't know what it is, but it's like it's an imbalance between supply and demand right now of the solutions and the requests.
And
So
we saw this because we tested this thesis out at RealCom in June, and several of us were there. And I made a Jim Lee and I made a presentation on cloud native and IBB and BACnet as well, all lumped in together, which is interesting. And the realization there is that something like cloud native is not very specific to smart buildings or HVAC or anything, right? It's obviously it's a horizontal subject. And all enterprises, especially the larger they are, the more is the case, are already there, right? They're already architecting and thinking about their enterprise resource management, CRM, and everything else in a cloud native way, right? There is no other option for them, right? So the way that is surfaced in conversation is that all this strategy that we're talking about, making buildings cloud native, is actually to take the buildings as we know them and put it into the a domain and a way of thinking and a way of managing that they are already committed to, right? So they may not be asking for the specifics. They may not be asking for an IBB as such, but they're asking for the information and the data and the information to be made available to them in the way that they're dealing with other information and data in their organization.
Interesting. So you're alluding to prompting them to look at this the same way they look at their organization, same way they look at their home, same way they look at their personal life,
and everything else in the enterprise.
Yep.
The accounting system is cloud.
Yep.
The CRM is cloud. Their production is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to that point, Otto, as I've said a couple times recently, the IBB in my mind is the linchpin to all of this, because it becomes the mechanism by which cloud vendor independence is achieved. It becomes a mechanism by which the cloud native architecture gets implemented, and it follows. If you think about our plug and play concept, you would basically have an app that you load on your phone, and suddenly you have connectivity to your systems. The vendors of the IBB are going to be the equivalent of Google Play and Apple, where you submit your apps for qualification to run in their environment. Well, in this case, they're qualifying them to run on the IBB, so that when you download the app to your phone, it's going to plug and play with the IBB, and you're good to go. You don't have to do anything special other than go get the app and load it up, right? That's a huge change. I mean, that's rewriting the way our industry works if we can actually get to that outcome. Because right now you need someone like an MSI or a capable systems integrator to get all these disparate things to work together, and it's expensive, and it requires specialized skills. And what we're trying to do is, at least for the purpose of data integration and interoperability, we're trying to take the sophistication out of it by making it something that is done behind the scenes transparently by applications that have all agreed to the IBB performance methodology.
I think that's really very well said, Steve. And the other thing I wanted to point out is Anto had some reluctance to kind of present this particular presentation because it has all of these tentacles going a lot of directions.
Right.
But the IBB is exactly that kind of a device or kind of an environment. And yeah, the whole idea of making that simple and making it more look like a phone app, I think is exactly where we're heading. But the point is the scope of this thing is hard to control. And I think the start at this this picograph, or what you want to call it here, this picture is a good start.
It's a good start. And what's interesting, Ken, is like the question Roger asked and the way Anto is speaking. We got to get the chicken and the egg thing is the most relevant thing here. It's push and pull. It's always going to be thus. Okay. So just put that aside for a minute. Then if you go to what Anto is thinking, I mean, we're already doing this. We're already doing this in so many areas of our life. Oh man, can you imagine? When I look at the fifth or the sixth one down, the result of status quo, Anto, you've got reduced relevance for the controls contractor. In my opinion, that should go straight across the board.
Yeah, it's just slightly different words, but it's basically that. Yeah. And the other thing is that, just picking up on what Steve was saying, is that this is from a technology perspective. There's work to do here, clearly, and there's work to do, education and everything else, of work to do to build stuff. But there's nothing new here. There's nothing that needs to be invented, right? It's all here, right? So the reason for bringing it up is that how does this get implemented by this industry? What is the impact of it? And that's really what we really want to try and sort of figure out.
So if you
to figure out today.
If you look at this, yes, the technology exists today and so forth, exactly what you said. So this is a business shift. This is a conversation around business side, and something we've been talking about, how the conversation continually has changed in the industry. Let's just use that as the word here. And that it is just as important, if not more important now than ever, to have the business conversation. To me, the business side drives this. It's not the technology. So that's number one, as I see it. And number two is that by having that change in conversation, then the question is, who leads it? As far as I'm concerned, it is both sides of the house. It is the owners, operators, because the way they must operate and manage their building has changed in the last several years. COVID, no COVID, regardless, they have to run it as a business more than ever. And we, as technology solution providers, whether we are a manufacturer, a system integrator, a controls contractor, or whatever, is that we have to help lead that conversation. If not, I don't think a cloud native way of doing things will get to where we want to try to drive it.
You know, I agree with that. The business owners are asking this question specifically, actually. How does Kubernetes and containers affect my business? You know what, I was thinking about this, the chicken and egg thing, and you know, Kubernetes and containers may be the key thing that broke open the conversation or brought the supply and demand and the chicken and egg together. And that is a technology thing, but it's being asked in a way of, why can't I get my solutions for my buildings to be using these specific new technologies that have made huge advances in efficiency, speed to market, cost of deployment, cost of support? Why can't I have those specific technologies in play in my buildings? And that, by the way, Kubernetes and containers and everything is part of the cloud native computing foundation architecture. So if I was to say, you know, to the theme of what's different about technology, I'd say Kubernetes and containers. Something you couldn't do 10 years ago, or couldn't contemplate 10 years ago. And then the IBB is where that is the host of those new technologies.
Well, the IBB is a manifestation of cloud native Kubernetes and containers for our application in our use case, right? So that's the way to think about that. It's fundamentally from a technology, it's the same thing, but it's applied to us.
And it changes the business discussion dramatically, as Steve was describing, and as we've been hearing customers ask for. They don't know they're asking for Kubernetes and containers and IBB, but they but that's how it manifests.
Right.
And to Mark, you raised a great point. Who's going to drive this? Who's going to lead this? Right. This table is just a table of the channel players, right? With the exception of the adventurous owner, the DIY owner. But this doesn't have any of the vendors, and this doesn't have the real sort of the bulk of the owners that we know are in different verticals and everything else. So we're not touching that sort of complication. And on the vendor side, obviously there are hardware vendors and software vendors and things like that probably warrants another table like this. But this is how this cloud native and IBB gets to market. This is the channel to market, right? So putting it up here, I'm not sure it implies that they're going to drive it or they're going to lead it. And Mark, I think you were sort of alluding that we might as well, as vendors, because we're mostly vendors here, drive it. Is that what you're alluding to? Because I don't see anything wrong with that.
No, that's what I was alluding to. But again, it's, I look at this as, an example I'll use is cybersecurity. In other words, it's everybody, all facets of a circle that are leading it to the same, whether you're a vendor, you're an owner, you're whatever the case is. And this is the same way. And because as I see our business, it is really business focused now. And yes, technology focused. Yes, technology is the enable. I don't want to discount the importance of technology, but it's business. As an owner, what I hear all the time is what are their concerns is, yeah, I can integrate, I can do this interoperability stuff. I know data is important, but more importantly for me is I got to run my office building completely different than I did 2 years ago. It's only half full, and it's only a quarter full 2 days a week or whatever it is. So that's one. And my building has taken a dive. It's gone from X dollars, is now worth Y dollars. How do I get that back up? I don't have the budgets that I used to. How do I manage CapEx, which you've got this in here, CapEx, OpEx. And there's more business and economic drivers as I look at it today that we collectively as an industry, again, whether you're implementing, whether you're designing the technology or whatever, we have to get on board with that together.
Yeah. I have a statement and a question for you, Mark. A statement to me is technology keeps getting less and less expensive. That's the first thing. But my question to you is, back in the 50s, when you were selling building automation stuff, when have we ever not had to, when have the supply side not driven any change in the market? I'd like for any of you to name a time when the builders or the owners came to us and we were just took phone calls. I think it's always been the case. I mean, tell me I'm wrong.
No, I totally agree. Who drives innovation in the industry? Right. It's not owners out there creating new technologies and so forth. It's the vendors, right?
Right.
Well, that means we also have to drive the context that goes along with it.
Yep.
Labor reduction, modernization, all that stuff.
Yeah. We historically have a terrible job at kind of positioning that part of things, but
yeah.
And I agree with you, Bill. It's been the creators that, of the technology or solution. Yeah. But, I think also it's as the market changes, as people's needs, requirements change, I think there is some pull albeit it's very little bit of pull, but it's at least some today than it, what it was. And I mean, let's face it, COVID completely changed how we have to operate buildings, plain and simple.
Right.
So guys, one more reason that I think this IBB is if we can get it out into the marketplace, why it's going to be so attractive. Fundamentally, it's an IT product. Okay, so right now, I mean, if you go back 20 years ago when we first started introducing Ethernet in the marketplace, and we wanted to get on the customer's network, we asked for an Ethernet address. So that was our interaction with IT. Then, and that's continued obviously to evolve in many different ways. But in the last 10 years, cybersecurity has become a big deal. And then whenever it comes up, we got to talk to the IT department. And we have to go through the diligence and convince them that what we've done is going to protect their building and protect everything from a security perspective. The IBB, as it's being designed, if you will, or specified, is essentially an IT appliance effectively. It runs in a server that's designed for cloud to run a cloud native architecture, right? It's and it's who's going to be best qualified to maintain it? I would argue the IT department, or if they don't have an IT department, a managed service provider.
I think that's
right
part
up,
of it.
Yeah, it's right. It's what they do, right? So we don't have to teach HVAC contractors what the hell containers are. We don't, right? Either the IT department is going to, because they've got the staff, or they're going to have an in-house managed service provider who's going to understand it, and then their job is to work with each of the vendors to basically load the applications in. Provide whatever provisioning, whatever security settings need to be in place, and manage that device like they would manage a server.
But I guess, Steve, isn't it a little bit alien to them, because where the IT department used to work from was that they had this huge server on site, an IBM mainframe or something, and that's just shifted to the cloud. And now everything that goes on is actually cloud. The operations are in the cloud. You got the operators are just interfacing with something that's remote. What we're now asking them to look at is something of a flatter architecture of the IBB plus cloud native elements of it. It's a different concept because they've now got something on-prem again, which perhaps they moved away from some time ago.
But Roger, I guess my argument is architecturally, it looks like a server in the cloud.
Well,
Yeah,
the way actually to think about that is to think about what the IT departments have gone through in the last 20 years with the change in telephony, right? PBXs, right? If you go back to the 80s, right? The wires used to come all the way to my desk, and that's it, all the way from the exchange to my desk, right? And then IP telephony started to occur, and then you have these PBXs that are on site, right? So an IBB is actually not much different from a technology perspective than a PBX.
It's really smart. In fact, Steve, what you're saying, like, you'll remember, Steve, we used to tiptoe past IT and go talk to the controls people, right, to make a sale. Right. The only way to scale this today is to buy off on IT. Going to controls guys and all that is reductive when you're thinking about something like this. The only way to scale it is to have IT on board with it.
On board, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about the columns on the table, one of the ways I've been sort of looking at this is that which of these columns are either going to have a great day in the next few years or a terrible day. Right. And it's not hard to think that the managed service provider, which has a column that actually has quite a few greens meaning good words, they're the ones that are most suited to absorb the IBB and deliver it and make it work.
Yep.
And it's quite interesting because they don't really, and I think this is your point, Roger, they don't really exist in our industry. They don't participate in our industry today.
Yep.
And
Yeah, because the fundamental shift is it's not about control. It's about data. It's about access to data and being able to get it from one application to another. And that's a very different problem than we've grown up with, which is how do you get a mechanical system to maintain set point and respond to the varying conditions in the facility. That's still a very skill set that's going to be needed, but the IBB is all about how do I get data from point A to point B with at the least possible cost and in a secure fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, it's actually how to get data and information from A to B that satisfies the IT requirements, but can be done by HVAC people.
Right. Yep.
Right. That's both parts of that.
I think Sharon's just brought something up there saying about just moving the need down to smaller projects as well, is that you know, when you start looking at multi-sites, which is a lot of what Tracy deals with, it still becomes one thing. It's just that it's multiple buildings. It's still pretty large.
Yeah, and in the architecture of the IBB, the way it was envisioned, took account of that, both large and small sort of use cases.
Multi-sites, yeah.
Yeah. So anything shocking out of this sort of conversation so far? I mean, if you're a system integrator, what would the advice be?
I'll say, if you're a systems integrator, I would say to them, I'd look them in the eye, I'd say, you're probably doing business like whoever gave you this business from the last century. It's time to update, get relevant, lower labor costs, and make more money, drop this stuff. I mean, I could sell this all day long to an SI. In fact, for anyone on this call or anyone on that little matrix you put down, if they're not looking at how can I monetize this? Oh, by the way, this is almost an overnight monetization. This is not a grind session for the next 5 years. Rick Justice, tell me I'm wrong. All right, thank you.
I think one of the things that may actually help kind of facilitate this is a little bit what Ken was talking about earlier on as well, is the SIs at the moment are doing okay in business. You know, there's still a lot of business going on and they think the world's going to carry on that way. But if new construction starts disappearing, they're going to have to rethink their business model. Right. And that's going to help drive some of the initiatives and the things we're talking about. And I truly believe that's going to be the case over the next 18 months. I just think with the reduction in new construction and the drive for retrofit, and it's not refurbishment, it's more about what Mark was saying, it was changing buildings for fit for purpose. I think that could be, you know, the thing that helps change the thinking overall.
Interesting. And you picked on system integration, integrators in that, but presumably it's similar in other roles in the supply chain.
Absolutely, and I mean the guys we don't talk about much are obviously the consultants and the mechanical contractors in this chain as well, which are going to have to change because if all that new construction does slow down or disappear, then they're going to have to change, and the whole structure all the way up to the people who are providing applications, the MSIs, all those things will change. It's across the board because it's a new, it's a different style. Although retrofit and refurbishment has traditionally been 70-odd% of the market, this is going to be a different phase, I think, than we've seen before.
I think just to add to what Roger's saying there too is the retrofit, as they change to retrofit, they're going to see that retrofit is always a much more complicated, much more touch feel, dig out that old stuff. IBB is going to have greater value to retrofit than it will new construction. I think in some ways it's just a pain for new construction. And it basically, from their point of view, just gets in the way. But I think once they start getting their head around major retrofits and how to do this fast and how to scale it, I think IBB will have value.
And I think you're right, Ken. The other word there is fast. How can they do it fast? You know, because some of the other technologies will then just jump straight in, whether it's wireless, 5G, whatever. All those vehicles will need to be adopted to actually build into the technologies that allow that speed to happen. And the configuration offsite, you know, all those sort of things are gonna really be a driver, I think, in the new market.
Yeah, so guys, as an example that comes to mind for me is you've got an office tower that's had been leased out to one, maybe two tenants, and now the tenants are downsizing, and you got all this unused space. And and the way the mechanical system has been designed, maybe you got an air handler for per floor for every 2 floors. And all of a sudden, you're wanting to take a given floor and divide it up among possibly 2 or 3 tenants. And how do you give each tenant some way to control their space? Because you're talking about individual VAV boxes typically that serve, that you could zone off, right? But if the IBB were there, the tenant app could easily associate the specific VAV boxes with that tenant's layout. And now they have visibility to their VAV boxes, and they know what the temperatures are in their space accordingly. And I'm just using the HVAC side of it, but obviously the same thing would apply for lights and potentially for access control and so on. But there's no easy way to do that today, right? Because it can be done. I'm not saying what I just described couldn't be done, but it isn't an app that you can just download to your phone, have it discover all the things, just do a quick mapping and hand it to the tenant. So I'm just thinking if the IBB existed, all of a sudden you could enable an app like that with almost no effort.
I think that's great, Steve. The analogy to the IBB and the app is that's right on, because if we think back, what changed the whole cell phone business was the ability for people to build apps. And I think the most exciting part of the IBB is not what exists out there now that can be connected to the IBB, but what hasn't been invented yet that will be connected. I think that's the exciting part, that we're actually starting a whole new generation.
Yeah, and in fact, we're already seeing it in this conversation. Right, we're already seeing what if this and what if that, which is great.
Another way to look at that would be if Apple came into the buildings industry and they invented a new product, what would it be? That would be game changing, like their watch and their phone. And
yeah, right. Yeah.
Might be an IBB.
Yeah, right. I agree.
So again, looking at this table, which I know is not in front of you now. We talked about MSPs, we talked about contractors and integrators. How about MSIs? Are they just going to sort of find their role in this, or just find a role in MSIs, or maybe that doesn't matter? I'm just thinking about how, going back to what Ken was saying, who's going to drive this? I think we are as good a group as any to drive it, and therefore, where should we drive? What should we be saying to MSIs, for example?
I think this is core. I mean, an MSI role to me seems like the most logical next entrance into this. The outcome they're trying to achieve using today's technologies is similar to what we're saying IBB and all of the standardization represents as an easier way, right? So to me, it's always been kind of obvious that an MSI MSIs are the ones who are going to step into the role to fire up IBBs, get them working, load on apps, make sure that the customer is happy and they're getting everything that they need. Just seems perfectly logical to me.
And you know, Tracy, I mean, certainly here, they're morphing into something else anyway, because they're acting as consultants to the, you know, the contractor, the consultants, the SIs, as well as the end users and everyone else. And these are the guys that are kind of beginning to link all the things together. And I think you're right. They're really important. You know, they're becoming an important role. How they eventually will pan out, I don't know. They'll probably lean more towards the consultancy side than the doing side, I think, eventually.
The thing that sort of concerns me is that when I talk to MSIs, when I think about MSIs, they seem to be conveying that they are almost like a software development house. They're more they have more DevOps than not non-DevOps, but they typically have a lot more skilled IT skilled workforce within the MSI, and they're obviously trying to push that, and they're obviously in a consulting role, which is selling by hours. So it's almost like looking at the big sort of system integrations in around Virginia. They want to make the problem as complex as possible, and the IBB approach is actually the complete opposite: is to make it as simple as possible so you can plug things in. So there's a tension there potentially. Is that just in my head, or?
I don't know. The MSIs here are very much working with the REITs, who are getting smarter. And let's be fair, they own most of the buildings in the office space, and it's the REITs are leaning on the MSIs to provide that standard solution, because the REIT knows what it wants. You know, it wants BIM integrating with everything it does. It wants all the things of the solutions tied together, and they're using the MSI as that consultant. And I think the more powerful the REITs get with their information, the more they're going to be using the MSI. And I think they are getting smarter and smarter. They know what they want from their portfolio of buildings, because at the end of the day, they're going back to what Mark was saying. They got to, and other people were saying earlier, they got to sell these things, or lease them, or let them, or do whatever else. So they know what they got to do to attract new customers, whether it's Steve's 3 of them on a floor, or someone wanting 2 or 3 floors. The people wanting tower blocks are disappearing, so they know they've got to provide the services and the structure to their incoming customers.
I think the other thing that might happen to them too is as they move from new construction to retrofit, they're used to getting lost into a 3, 4, 5-year project. Then they're controlled by the owner, and they basically have all the resources in the world to make this thing work. When they come into the reality of retrofit and they show up with their bag of tricks, it's got to be quick, it's got to be dirty, it's got to pull this stuff together, and they're going to be dealing with the same intellect for for a fraction of the cost, kind of thing. So it's a whole different environment.
The speed's going to be huge. They need to actually get in and out as quickly as possible to get that building back on the market,
and actually leave the owner in a position that he can keep it going as well. So if he wants to add a new app, a new indoor air quality app that was invented yesterday, or human resources, he can actually do that.
It increases speed and scalability for any multi-building owner to have a framework like this. I listen to everybody talk. I keep thinking of Southwest Airlines strategy, right? One airplane. I train one maintenance technique, one inventory, all of that, all the economics that go along with that would apply here.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, right.
We're well past the top of the hour. Tracy, do you want to do a quick recap on what we learned here today? And then we'll...
Sure, I can give it a try. So all of all of this to me, standardization around the IBB and the other standards that the group has been working on, seems to me, somebody who's been working interoperability for a couple of decades now, extremely logical. There's a lot of benefits for different stakeholders in the industry for this. There's opportunities for new business models for existing businesses to adapt to the new business models. And I think we're going to see resistance from those who feel threatened by this because their current business model is contrary to what we're seeing. But ultimately, I believe this is a natural evolution of the industry, and we're going to see it happen. Hopefully, as a group here, we can foster that in a little bit faster.
Right. Thank you, Tracy. And we haven't totally decided exactly what October will look like, but likely to be a continuation of this along the lines that you've just stated, Tracy, and everybody else. You know, how does this actually become real, as it were, in the industry? So it'll be interesting next few months. So with that, I'm going to wrap this Monday Live. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks, the audience, for being here. And we'll get the video out tomorrow or the day after. And otherwise, have a great week and see you next week.
Okay.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Bye now.